Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Daily. It is Monday. It is time to start the week, and that is Bill Landis, and I am Austin Ward. And it was an eventful weekend for Ohio State. Both the former players heading to the NFL Draft or signing free agent deals to head to the next level, and some work on the recruiting and portal trail for the Buckeyes. So we're going to get into all of that to get the week started. And Bill, I think probably the number one headliner was not the NFL Draft. It was an Ohio State legacy making his intentions known that he was going to join his brother and follow in the footsteps of his father.
Yeah, Lorenzo Styles coming home. Or Lorenzo Styles Jr. I guess I should specify coming home. The father, I think, is out of eligibility. Although, why not?
Still in school. He's still in school.
Still in school, and there are no rules. So if you want to try to sneak him out there, why not? No, Lorenzo Styles Jr. Coming from Notre Dame to Ohio State to play cornerback is interesting. When we first started hearing rumblings about this, I mean rumblings this year, not last year. It didn't strike me as like a need, or I was perhaps a bit nervous of like looking at the math and seeing like, okay, like you're going to potentially bring in a corner when you have limited spots and like you definitely need an offensive lineman. It seems like Ohio State's not worried about any of that. They just wanted to bring Lorenzo in, so they're doing it. And I know I like the idea of adding that kind of athleticism to the secondary. I don't know. He's got 2 years basically to figure out how to play cornerback at the Division I level. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think he's got some intriguing traits to him that probably can make it work. And Ohio State's secondary, I think, should always be willing to bring in guys with that kind of athleticism and basically just see what happens. Like I think it's certainly worth a roll of the dice because there's nothing you have to worry about from like the family standpoint, the character standpoint. All there is to know about the Styles family, and it's always good to bring, I think, a legacy back into the program. So we'll see how it goes, but I think it's an exciting addition.
Yeah, it seemed like the only quote-unquote risk to this move was if Ohio State was unsure, which I don't know why it would be at this late date. The transfer portal declaration deadline closed on Sunday, so Ohio State had a good idea of what its numbers were going to be when it took Lorenzo Styles Jr. But let's say a week ago at this time, when this was first becoming a more serious possibility, and really this is about the third time that this conversation has come up with the family in Ohio State and him playing cornerback back with the Buckeyes. But the number was the issue was trying to figure out how that worked. If you were trying to add an offensive lineman, if you had any interest in adding a defensive tackle, and Ohio State had visitors on both fronts over the weekend, could you make those numbers work? I guess there's a possibility that Lorenzo Styles Jr. could come on the short term and be a walk-on if need be, because he wants to be back. He's coming back home. There will probably be some NIL opportunities. He's an in-state kid. The price tag would be different. I think at some point the numbers for a scholarship are going to almost certainly present themselves. But either way, Ohio State felt like through the combination of players who had already departed prior to the weekend and the potential for some medical hardships that they would be able to add all three without any concern. So once that part of the picture was cleared up, you can say, okay, well, there's not any necessary downside here. You're not going to cost yourself one of those other positions that you may want to add. It's not an instant impact play necessarily, certainly not at cornerback. Maybe there's an opportunity for Lorenzo to return punts or kicks that might be appealing. We know he's not going to play wide receiver. He had already started making that transition over to corner during spring camp at Notre Dame, but there may be some short-term value there on special teams. We'll see. In terms of defense, it's definitely more likely to take time for him to make an impact there.
I was watching like some of what he did in high school as a defensive player. A lot of his highlights are receiver highlights because that's clearly what he wanted to do coming out of high school. But he was a really good defensive player in high school as well. He played it seemed like he was playing a fair bit like down near the line of scrimmage sometimes. Like it just made me wonder, like, okay, you're going to put him at corner. I wonder if there's some like nickel versatility, or I don't know about safety, but if he can maybe thread a little bit of that needle they seem to be interested in, where a guy with cornerback skills can play that safety position, but he's not afraid to kind of like stick his nose in and play closer down to the line when need be. So I don't know. It's exciting. I don't want to see Ohio State like fall into a routine of like, hey, this guy used to play offense, let's try him with defense now. This is now the third time they're trying to do it. And I think at a certain point you want to recruit defensively well enough where you don't have to do it out of high school. But I don't think there's much of a downside to it. Like you said, it does get them to 8 cornerbacks as we record this, which is the number that they want. They added Davis and Igbinosun in the first transfer window. Now they add Lorenzo. That puts them at 8 corners. We'll see what they bring in potentially in the 2024 recruiting class. And maybe like if Denzel Burke goes, maybe you soften that blow a little bit now with the addition of Lorenzo. And like the timing of it is interesting for me too, because, and I'm sure we'll get into some of this maybe, but we're coming off the NFL draft where Ohio State again did not have a defensive back drafted, and I'm looking at the last 3 draft eligible recruiting classes, 2018, 2019, 2020, have yet to produce a drafted defensive back. And if you project it out forward, it's probably those 3 classes are probably only going to generate one in Lathan Ransom, maybe Josh Proctor, but probably only one with Lathan Ransom. That's odd. That's weird. I don't know how that happened. And I'm not saying that Lorenzo Styles is going to be an NFL defensive back, but he has the athletic traits of one. He's like a 4.4 guy coming out of high school. He's pretty tall. He's long. He's fluid in his motions. Like there's NFL upside there too. And I don't think something happened where they lost that kind of player in the secondary. And I think at this point, as they're trying to build that back up, like if a guy who has that kind of upside wants to join the fold, I think you have to say yes. Obviously, you vet all the other stuff, but there's nothing else to worry about with Lorenzo. And he has the on-the-field stuff that I think you're looking for, and they need to reinfuse the secondary in particular with NFL-caliber guys, because I don't know, like we're suddenly 3 years into not really having that, which kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, it's definitely crazy, and it was probably not the ideal weekend for Ohio State in the NFL draft. Thursday night went quite well for them, and then there was a lot of sliding and questions, and some guys that wound up with undrafted free agent deals. We're going to come back to that transfer portal conversation. Players had until Sunday night to make their decision, so we'll get into that on the podcast daily on Tuesday once the dust settles. Sometimes it can take time for those names to pop into the portal, but we'll look back on what happened to Ohio State's roster and any potential moves that may still be out there for them on Tuesday. But Bill gave us an excellent transition into what happened in the NFL draft. And some of Berm and I were in St. Louis for one of those things that you're talking about with an Ohio State defensive back, cornerback, falling out of the draft. That was not a fun experience to be in the room. And you can sort of project that out, like what happened with Cam Brown, and what was happening surely with Ronnie Hickman. They at least, Tanner McAllister as well. He thought that he had done enough on pro day to get an opportunity maybe to have his name called. It was a sobering reminder that it is still very, very hard to get drafted, even if you are an Ohio State player, an Ohio State starter, a proven performer at the Power 5 level. There's a reason that they throw out all those stats about the number of guys who don't go pro in their athlete or as an athlete in those NCAA commercials that were so ubiquitous for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. There were a lot of good players, not just at Ohio State, who didn't get drafted. So like, I don't mean to paint it as like an Ohio State specific problem, or even that it is a problem. But we talk about Ohio State here, so we're gonna highlight that. I think maybe the most damning part of all of it is that, like, I'm not surprised that it happened. Like it was, I thought like the Cam getting drafted, and as I said on the show we did like Thursday afternoon, like I thought there was a chance Ronnie wouldn't get drafted, and it does make me almost. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. I feel like if Tanner McAllister had gotten the combine invite and was put through the paces, that's like it seems to be a different process when that happens, sort of regardless of the caliber of player you are. If he had been put through the paces that way, I feel like he would have maximized those opportunities probably better than his defensive back counterparts who ended up not getting drafted. Just like talking with him at the little pro day they did, the mini pro day they did at Ohio State, and then seeing how he performed there on the real pro day at Ohio State, like he was pushing really hard to chase that dream. It didn't happen for him, but like his athletic testing was pretty good. I'm assuming the film like wasn't great for NFL teams. But then it turns out that like all 3 of them end up not getting drafted anyway. So I guess it didn't really matter. And it made for like a weird third day of the draft with those 3 not going, and then DeJuan Jones slipping into the 4th round, and Luke Whippler like falling like, I don't know, way farther than I thought he did. I don't know, like what did you make of the Luke Whippler thing?
Yeah, I wonder about the quality of the advice that the Buckeyes got, either from their agents, from their families, from anybody else. I'm sure that, let's look at the offensive line, that Justin Fry and Ryan Day, they're not going to beg guys to stay. Like, it is good for the program when they go to the NFL draft. They're not going to stop people from pursuing their dreams. I bet pretty confidently that they said, well, just because somebody told you that you might be the number 2 center taken, or that your film from the last 2 years means you could sneak into the first round as a tackle, doesn't mean that that will happen. It's a lot easier to look at only the best case scenario and not the worst for these decisions. And we now have the benefit of hindsight, but there was so much element of risk, especially for Luke Whippler. His decision was very surprising to Ohio State, and it came about relatively late. I don't know who told him that. He may not even be upset about it, because he did still get his name called, and he's going to have an opportunity to compete in a training camp moving forward to make a roster. Like, maybe that's fine with him. I feel like, especially in the new era of name, image, and likeness, and the amount of talent that was coming back for Ohio State, the spot where these guys did wind up being drafted, that it would have been more appealing for them to stay, not just for the, well-worn boost your stock next year, but just like making some money and still playing and competing, and then potentially also maybe making more money a year ago. DeJuan next year had never had any plans to come back for another season, but he could have. Luke Whippler was widely expected to, did not. Ronnie Hickman made up his mind before November 26th, which was the most staggering thing of all, as his play was starting to slide, and it became pretty clear that he wasn't going to be a day 1 or day 2 pick, and maybe not one at all, which wound up being the case. So that's the part that I don't know if concern is the right word. I'm interested in for Ohio State, because I don't know how you fix it. You don't want to stand in their way, but also like clear, educational insight and advice could have helped both the Buckeyes and these players.
I think there's an important lesson there in like listening to the NFLPA when they tell you that you're not going to be a first, second round pick. Like, I get that it's probably not what you want to hear. But like, especially now that the game has changed, like you can make money now if you're not going to be. And like, I'm never going to say like, oh, this person made a mistake for like trying to chase their NFL dream. Like, there's plenty of guys who get drafted in the 6th round, don't get drafted at all, and make it in the league for a long time and make a tremendous living. So I hope that happens for Luke. And like, DeJuan Jones was drafted in the 4th round. Like, he's drafted on fringe starter territory anyway. So it's not like he fell off the face of the earth here, but I don't know what the answer is either. I do wonder if there are guys on Ohio State's roster, just like, or any roster, but to use Ohio State as a specific example, like they see this happening, if it gives them any more pause now moving forward. Now that, because this is, I know NIL's been around for like 2-ish years now, but this felt like kind of like the first draft cycle where guys really could have had decisions to make, whether or not to take that NIL money and stay and try to improve your draft stock, or just go chase the NFL because that's what you want to do. Now that there's sort of data points with that, maybe it could make a guy or two more likely to stay if they're a fringe candidate moving forward, which I think is maybe better long-term for college football. Perhaps for the players themselves. Like, I don't know. There's no guarantee that Luke Whippler would have improved his draft stock had he come back. Maybe the NFL would have always looked at him as a 6th round pick and a guy who was more of a backup than he is a starter in the NFL. But, he could have tried to strain for something greater than that while also making money at a place like Ohio State. And that could be useful information for players in the future.
I guess the reason that I say that it's not necessarily a concern or a worry for Ohio State is twofold. A, what you said, it's their decision, it's their dream, it's their professional aspirations, and whatever they decide they want to do is what ultimately matters most. The second part is that Ohio State had several other situations like this where Cade Stover or Tommy Eichenberg or Lathan Ransom were weighing their options and could have gone and elected not to, probably for this very reason. There's uncertainty, and the way Ohio State as a whole, let's include the collectives in this conversation just for the sake of conciseness, they're more likely to bring money and support to their current players. They do that at a level that is, I've been told, higher or more competitive than anywhere else in the country for the current roster. We've talked ad nauseum about what that means on the recruiting trail and what Ohio State can or should do there. When it comes to guys who are there and who are weighing NFL decisions, and this came up even at the very top for CJ Stroud and Paris Johnson, go say, hey, is there anything you can do to make this easier or more comfortable for me to stay so that I don't have to take that risk and can stay at Ohio State for another year? And I can tell you with a lot of certainty that that did happen for some of those guys that were weighing and on the fence. So there was success as well for Ohio State when it came to retaining the current roster. We're going to look at these cases that didn't work out for Ron. I mean, Luke's, again, like he may think that's totally fine. Ronnie Hickman may be happy that even if his name didn't get called, that he got to sign a contract and gets to go to training camp. Like, I'm not saying that they are unhappy with that or that it didn't work out in their best interest or what they wanted, but I know that it was uncomfortable in the Brown household. That wasn't the way that they were planning to spend their Saturday afternoon. So I think that it's fair to look at it as a mixed bag, and that maybe this will continue to work in favor of Ohio State and keeping guys in the fold, because they already did do that in a handful of key examples this offseason.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not privy really to the conversations that Ohio State had with these guys as they were going through these decisions. But I'd imagine that Ohio State's coaches, like, all they can do is be honest with them. And I'd imagine that the coaching staff probably did not think it was right for some of these guys to go. Like Luke Whippler, I think it was pretty obvious that Ryan Day was quite surprised by that move. Like you said, like, you don't beg them to come back. You can't convince them of everything. All you can do is try to tell them the truth. But if you do that and then it like sort of plays out the way that you perhaps laid out for them, I think that might help Ohio State too in the long run. If future players see that and see that, like, the program's not trying to like deceive them and have them come back for their own benefit. Like, clearly there is a benefit, but there can be a benefit for the player as well in this new era. But hopefully, like, all these guys are happy with how it went, and I hope they have, like, long pro careers and can turn it into something for them. It's cool that like half of them are going to get to play together with the Cleveland Browns, because the Cleveland Browns decided they were going to draft and sign Ohio State players now. So I guess a large portion of the fan base that are also Browns fans are going to get to continue to watch these guys too. So that's cool.
Yeah, they didn't the Browns fan base spend years be like, hey, why don't we just take Buckeyes? Won't that improve the roster? Like, what's wrong with this?
Well, they heard you. If it took them a few years, but they finally heard you. So it's cool. Like, I don't know the Browns. Like, I don't follow the Browns. I don't know what they need, but like, I guess it's possible that like in a couple of years their starting offensive line features Luke Whippler and DeJuan Jones, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah, that would be. Anything else jump out to you over the weekend?
People are already talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. on the NFL Draft show, which is like not surprising, but like, it's funny to me that that's how we're killing time now on day 2 and 3 of the draft, is talking about the guys that are going to be there next year. And it further solidified for me that if quarterbacks didn't exist, Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, would be the first pick in next year's draft.
There's a lot of conversation about that, isn't there, already? I mean, our mock draft's just going to be really easy for everybody. They're just everybody that's doing next year is going to put Marvin at number 2. Like, there's just, you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, 2 or 3, I guess, depending on what you think of Caleb Williams and Drake May. It is funny to me. I will tell Ohio State fans right now, they're not going to have 8 first-round picks next year. Like,
no.
This 2024 mock drafts that just plug in 5 stars based on where they're ranked out of high school is not going to be how it goes a year from now. Because if you go back and look at last year's and see how many Ohio State guys they had in the first round, it's lazy work. So I think Ohio State's going to have I think they're going to have a really good draft class next year. And maybe we can save that for a topic of discussion at another time as we put a pin in this episode. But they're not going to break a record, I don't think, for first round picks in 2024.
No, but the overall size of the class, when you start to put the picture together, is pretty staggering. That could be something special and something that Ohio State is going to need to maximize this year. Oh, I can't say championship or bust on May 1st. That's too early. But boy, are the pieces in place for that. We'll talk about that later in the week, perhaps, or the month of May as it goes along. It's finally here. Cue up your Justin Timberlake sound bites and enjoy the first day of May. Thanks for spending part of it with Bill and me here on the Podcast Daily. We'll be back in Roosters later on today. We'll have the live show in the Horseshoe Lounge, and then the Podcast Daily for the rest of the week, plus some talking stuff with Berm will be coming as he sets the scene for this month ahead too. So look out for all that, and thanks again for joining us. We will talk to you later.